Good evening, everyone. My name is Dan Lawson. I'm Director of the National Center for Interstate Compacts at the Council of State Governments. Appreciate you all joining us tonight. We got a couple of speakers, and then Matt Schaefer, our resident expert on the Dentist and Dental Hygienist Compact, is going to walk you through it. But again, really appreciate you all joining us tonight. Just wanted to say a little bit about the Council of State Governments. We're a membership organization for states. Every state's a member. We're nonpartisan, nonprofit. We provide technical assistance to states on a range of issues. We were founded in 1933 at the University of Chicago, and we have worked on interstate compacts since our founding. We don't own them, but we are the only center in the United States that specializes in them. And again, Matt will explain more about interstate compacts and especially the DDH as we move forward. We founded the National Center for Interstate Compacts in 2004. Right now, the vast majority of our work is with occupational licensure compacts, but we work on a range of compact and compact associated issues with the states and with third-party organizations. I believe we got a list of the compacts that we've worked on. So there's currently 15 occupational licensure compacts. We're about to roll out a compact for dietitians and school psychologists, and we just started work with respiratory therapy. But here are all of the occupational licensure compacts and their partner organizations. We either facilitated these or advised on the facilitation of all of them, beginning with the Nurse Licensure Compact and then the Interstate Medical Licensure Compact for physicians. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt Rossetto with the American Dental Association. Matt.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Dan, and thanks everyone for joining us tonight. I'm going to start just talking about the reason the American Dental Association is behind this and how this particular compact came to be, ADA policy, and why we believe that the compact is the best way for licensure portability moving forward. So the ADA's policy on dental licensure has been the same in its current version since 2018, but our policy has pretty much always encourage folks, dental boards in particular, to accept multiple pathways for licensure. And in this case, our policy since 2018 has been to encourage dental boards to consider participation in licensure compacts. That's been the case since 2018. Our policy on dental hygienists is very, very similar, although it doesn't include specifically licensure compacts. The same principle applies. Next slide, please. All right, so I'll let Matt Schaefer talk about the specifics of the compact itself, but from the ADA's perspective, we believe that it does a few different things. It facilitates mobility for licensees, it eases the burden of applying for and maintaining multiple licenses. This is particularly important if you're a dentist who practices in a border area or for one reason or another has reason to practice in more than one state. That process can be incredibly expensive. It can be cumbersome and time consuming. And so the goal is for those with a valid unencumbered license to be able to practice in any participating state in the compact. I also want to talk briefly about the Department of Defense's support for this. This is something that while many states have taken important steps to support military families and spouses who may work disproportionately in professions that require an occupational license, the Department of Defense is supportive in particular of the compact model, largely because they are sensitive to the idea of military spouses and military members being treated differently than all other practitioners. The reason that the DoD is behind this is that they want everyone, including military members, treated the same under licensing laws. They're very sensitive to that. Next slide, please. So the next thing I want to talk a little bit about is the future workforce. We are finally reaching the point where the baby boomers and the millennials are essentially at parity in terms of the age distribution in the dentist workforce. And one of the things that we know just based on our research done by the ADA's Health Policy Institute is one of the things that millennial dentists crave is the ability to pick up and move. The latest data that we have from ADA's HPI shows that between 13 and 15% of dentists will move states within the first 5 years of graduating dental school. Now, this is a larger number than a lot of us had been aware of, and certainly something that we believe augurs well for augurs well for the compact and this particular model. Next slide, please. So I'll talk a little bit about the actual process, again, from the ADA side. Matt Schaefer will go into all of these details, but again, internally for those that are ADA member dentists, Dan or whomever's controlling, if you can scroll through the next couple of, perfect, thank you. This was a deliberative and transparent process. This started initially in 2019, but as after the ADA was successful in their application, this was something where all interested councils, which includes the Council on Government Affairs, Council on Dental Education and Licensure, as well as the Council on Dental Practice, were regularly updated on during the course of compact development. The ADA staff updated State Dental Society executive directors regularly. In 2022, when the first draft of the compact was first released, executive directors were invited to join listening sessions done by the ADA's executive director, as well as staff, where the compact was explained section by section, and folks were given the opportunity to ask questions and provide their feedback and their input. There were also multiple presentations on the power of three, and the past 3 years of the president also contained mentions and presentations on the compact itself. And based on the feedback from state dental societies, there were absolutely substantive changes made, which was why the final version was released in early 2023. And we can skip through this particular slide. This is something that Matt Schaefer will cover in his presentation in talking about regulatory authority and CODA. This is, again, something that I mentioned earlier. The American Student Dental Association, as well as ADEA, were both highly supportive of the initial concept of the compact, and they signed on as initial sponsors of the application. They have continued to be supportive throughout this process. And the final thing that I will say, and again, Matt will cover this at the tail end of his, we have 3 states that have already adopted the compact: Washington, Iowa, and Tennessee, with unanimous support. We have 2 states in Ohio and New Jersey where the compact is already halfway through. Pennsylvania recently filed theirs. We expect Wisconsin to do so fairly soon as well. We have about a dozen states that have told us they are ready to file or have already indicated that they are filing for 2024. Oh, and again, there we go. There's the map. The goldenrod states on there had legislation that was introduced this session in a couple of places, including Kansas and Minnesota, that'll be carried over into next year's session. And Texas and Georgia. Georgia's bill was introduced late in the session and was never seriously considered. Texas's bill got halfway through and then was stalled in the Senate due to a committee chair that stalled all of the compacts on this particular session. So we'll keep this map updated as best we can. The map is also live on ddhcompact.org and will be, again, continuously updated as we have states file. And Matt Schaefer, go ahead.
All right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Matt Rosetto. Matt, I just wanted to direct your attention. I think there was some questions in the chat during the Q&A that maybe you could take a stab at answering from the ADA perspective if you want to take a look at those. So my name is Matt Schaefer with the Council of State Governments. I'm in CSG's National Center for Interstate Compacts, and here this evening to give you kind of an overview of the Dentist and Dental Hygienist Compact. Like Dan mentioned, we've been involved in facilitating the development process for all of the licensure compacts that exist. And so if you have any questions about this specific compact and how it works for dentistry or just compacts generally, we'd love to get your questions answered this evening. So feel free to drop those in the chat. We'll be monitoring and we'll have plenty of time at the end of the webinar to answer all of your questions. All right, so we've seen over the past decade or so at the National Center for Interstate Compacts a real explosion of interest in using compacts to solve this issue of licensure portability. So compacts have been around for hundreds of years, but really just in the past decade or so, we've seen states starting to use these as mechanisms to solve the licensure portability issues that face a lot of healthcare professions who have high usage of telepractice or highly mobile populations who practice in multiple states simultaneously. So really at their core, what these licensure compacts are trying to achieve is the facilitation of multi-state practice. Like Matt Rosetto mentioned, allowing the dentist or hygienist to be able to practice in multiple states without needing to obtain individual state-specific licenses in each state in which they want to practice. So the concept is that you maintain one qualifying license, and that authorizes you to practice in other member states that are a part of the compact without needing to obtain a license there. So we always mention that compacts help maintain or improve public health and safety. And this is largely down to the amount of information sharing that occurs amongst the member states. So things like availability of significant investigative information, final board adverse actions, all of that information is shared amongst the member states, and they all have access to that information, and they can use that information to better protect their public and raise the bar around regulation in public health and safety. And this is all done through a shared information system or a data system that the Compacts Commission will house, and all the member states feed up data and information into that data system. So we're providing regulators with more information than they might currently have access to about licensees who are practicing across state lines. And then lastly, preservation of state authority over professional licensing. So these compacts are facilitating multi-state practice while simultaneously allowing the state to retain their sovereignty over things like licensure requirements and scope of practice. So the scope of practice in your state is completely unimpacted by the compact. The Dental Practice Act is not touched by anything in the compact, and state-specific licensure requirements are not touched by the compact. So the way to think about it is the compact is a distinct, separate, optional pathway to practice if you want to be mobile or work in multiple states. But the state-specific pathway to practice will continue to exist. So this is not a takeover of professional licensing, but this is just the creation of an additional pathway amongst all of the other pathways that already exist. So if you have alternative pathways to licensure in your state, those continue to exist. Your regular pathway for a single state license continues to exist. And then the compact is just creating this new pathway to practice via a compact privilege. And you can see here at the bottom just how many states have adopted these compacts. Almost all states have passed one. The only states that haven't yet are New York, Massachusetts, Alaska, and California are the only four. So we've all, and a majority of states have passed multiple, as you can see there, 293 pieces of legislation just in the past 7 years. And then Dan shared with you the list of 15 professions that currently have these in place. Here's the list again, and you can see the number of member states that they have as well. So nursing and medicine leading the way with 41 member states, and psychology and PT close behind that with 40 and 37. So these are our oldest compacts, and they've been around the longest, so naturally they have the most member states. The compacts at the bottom of your screen there, you can see dentist and dental hygienist with 3 member states. There's nothing particularly wrong with these compacts. They're just brand new. That's the only reason why there's fewer members is they've only been out to the states for 1 legislative session. These things typically take time to generate momentum out in the states, and usually we see a big uptick in years 2 and 3 with state adoption. So I would predict that most of these compacts that just have a few member states right now we'll see probably in the double digits by the end of next year. All right, so I want to talk about the development process for this compact, and I think this is particularly important because of accusations that we've heard since the compact was finalized in January about this process and who may or may not have been invited to participate. So these discussions really began in 2019 when CSG convened all of the national dental organizations together to kind of have an initial pitch of this concept of an interstate compact for dentistry. You can see there the list of organizations who were invited and participated in that meeting. In 2021, as Matt Rosetto mentioned, the ADA, along with the ADHA, applied for a grant program that CSG was facilitating with funding from the Department of Defense to develop new compacts for new professions. And the ADA and ADHA were successful in their application. You can see there the list of organizations that signed on as supporters to their application. So ADEA, ASDA, the Joint Commission on National Dental Examinations, and the Coalition for Modernization of Dental Licensure. And also AADA, the dental administrators, verbally committed to supporting the effort, although they didn't sign on to the application formally. The AADB was invited to participate, but declined to do so and sent a letter to both ADA and CSG indicating that they did not believe a compact for dentistry was a good idea. And so they were included and invited to participate, but declined to do so. The first step in this process was convening what we call the technical assistance group. And that's a broad group of stakeholders. We had about 20 folks on this group made up of licensed dentists and dental hygienists. We had board members, we had board administrators, executive directors, as well as ADA and ADHA staff. And you can see there on the last bullet, the dental boards who were involved. That's something we've heard over the course of the past year, is that there was no dental boards involved in the development of this compact. And so I can hopefully be rest assured tonight that that's just not factually accurate. There is a lot of dental boards that were involved in the development of this compact. You can see the list of the boards there on the screen. The next step in this process was the compact document team. Now, this was a smaller subset of the technical assistance group that actually put pen to paper on the compact language itself. And again, you can see there the dental boards who were involved in this part of the process. These were legal counsel or executive directors, staff who had a lot of expertise in regulation and also legislative drafting. We had a public comment period where for 8 weeks where we received over 400 comments from the general public. We shared all of those comments with the drafting team who made updates and changes to the compact based on the feedback that we received. And I'll just note here as well, the AADB was invited to participate in the public comment process, but again, declined to do so. And we didn't receive any comment from them while it was publicly available. The compact was finalized, as Matt mentioned, in January of 2023. Or 2023, sorry, with consensus from both the document team and the technical assistance group on the final draft. Just want to note here some additional points of involvement. One of the points of contention that we've heard is that AADB did not know that this was happening, or this was happening without them, that they were somehow excluded from the process, and intentionally we chose to not include them, but that's just not the case at all. You can see here the amount of involvement that they had in terms of invitations to meetings, presentations from me about the compact, as well as invitations to participate in the process, review the language, provide their feedback, but again, declined to do so. The AADA was also heavily involved in the process, and so there's plenty of dental board involvement. And so, if you hear things about dental boards not being involved in this development process, that's just not the case at all. All right, so let's get into some of the specifics about the compact. So here's some commonly used terms that would be helpful for you to understand as you're reviewing the model legislation. So the first here is participating state. That just means any state that has enacted the compact, known as a participating state. Qualifying license. This is a active and unencumbered license that's issued by a participating state. A remote state is a state that is in the compact where the licensee is seeking to practice via a compact privilege. And that's our next term here is compact privilege. That's just legal authorization granted to practice in a single remote state. It's equivalent to a license from a legal standpoint. And then lastly, compact commission, or commission is just the joint government agency that is tasked with implementing and administering the compact on an ongoing basis. So this is the governing body that administers and implements the compact. So this is not the CSG compact. This is not the ADA compact. This compact belongs to the states, the member states that enter into this contractual agreement with one another, this legally binding agreement. And so it's up to the states to administer and govern this agreement that they've entered into with one another in the long term. So CSG often will provide legal counsel for commissions, but in terms of having a formal voting role in dictating policy that the commission is discussing, that's strictly left to the member states, and no outside entity would have a say on this group. Okay, so at a very high level, here's how the model works. So you've got a dentist or a hygienist who holds an active and unencumbered license in a compact member state. Again, we call that a qualifying license. So then they apply for what we call compact privilege. That practitioner undergoes a FBI background check. Their eligibility is verified. They pay fees and complete any kind of jurisprudence that might be necessary in the remote state. And then they receive their compact privilege. And after that happens, they are then legally authorized to practice in that remote state where they do not hold a license, but they hold a compact privilege. Now, you may be asking, there's still an application process. There's still fees involved. How does this differ from what currently exists, the current licensure process for endorsement or credential? And I think the most important things to emphasize on this slide are the speed at which the compact privilege is issued. So currently you might have to wait weeks or months on the determination of a licensing board to issue you a license. The compact privilege is done in a streamlined manner so that the privilege can be issued in a matter of minutes. And so you're really just kind of filling out a form, and you're going to get your privilege in a matter of minutes rather than having to wait on the board to make a decision. So there's immense time saving on the licensee. You're going from a scenario where you might be out of work for a few months if you move because you're trying to get relicensed, or you have to do additional requirements or things like that, to now under the compact, you can get access to work in a remote state very quickly. The standardized requirements, that's also a key point to meet here. Rather than having to navigate each state's individual process for endorsement or licensure by credential, which does vary, there's a standard in the compact that's set, and if you meet that standard, you're good to go. So it doesn't matter if you've been practicing 3 years or 5 years, you're not going to have to go and get your a transcript from your dental school or anything like that, because none of that is a part of the process, or it's all done on the front end. You're able to get compact privileges in a very streamlined manner. And the other thing I would mention here is the cost saving. So typically the compact privilege is going to be cheaper than the fee for a full license, although I'll say a remote state does retain the authority to set their fee at whatever they want to. So if they wanted to charge the same amount for the compact privilege as they do for a full dental license, that's within their prerogative to do that. So the remote state retains control over the fee for the compact privilege, but typically the fee is going to be lower than the fee for a full license. You can see there the example that I gave, the PT compact, the commission fee is $45, and then most of the remote states either match that $45 fee or maybe do slightly above that. So you're talking probably about a pretty good amount of cost savings for the licensee with fees. Okay, so if you've looked at the compact, it is a lengthy document because what we're talking about here is a legal contract between states. So there's a lot on the back half that deals with compact administration and legal governance and things like that. Most of the pertinent requirements and elements related to dentistry are in the front half. And so I'll talk about a few of the key requirements that dentists and hygienists would need to be aware of. So these are found in sections 3 and 4 of the compact. Section 3 outlines the state requirements to join the compact, and then section 4 outlines the requirements on the practitioner in order to obtain a compact privilege. So you can see here the primary requirement, holding a qualifying license. So again, that's an active and unencumbered license issued by a participating state. So that's number one, got to have a license, obviously, and it needs to be free of any encumbrances. Number two, pass the national board exam administered by the Joint Commission. Number three, CODA accredited education. That's pre-doctoral dental education leading to a DDS or DMD degree that's accredited by CODA, or a CODA accredited dental hygiene education program. Now, I will note here, there's been some misinformation about this particular point, and groups saying that actually CODA accredited education is not required under this compact, and that's just not true. The language expressly requires CODA accredited education. There is language at the end of this particular requirement, if you look at it in section 3 and 4, that says that there could be another accrediting agency that's approved by the U.S. Department of Education. And this is really standard in all of the licensure compacts, which allows the compact to be evergreen and evolve and grow with the profession. We want this thing to last for 40, 50 years. So let's say 40 years from now, there's a new accrediting body out there other than CODA. We don't want the compact to be irrelevant because the profession has evolved a little bit past where we are in this current time. And so that's the purpose of that language. If you look at it where it says, or another accrediting agency approved by the Department of Education. So it's got to be a legitimate accrediting agency for dental programs that's approved by USDE. And currently no other accrediting body exists. So right now in this current time, CODA accredited education is required. But if CODA ever changes their name in the future, which has happened, I think 5 or 6 times throughout its existence, if they ever change their name or reorganize themselves, or there's a new accrediting entity out there, the compact will not be irrelevant immediately because of this change in the future. Okay, number 4, successful completion of a clinical assessment. This is probably where we've gotten the most questions in regards to this compact is what do you mean by your definition of clinical assessment? Because if you look at it, it is broadly drafted, but again, this is intentional in order to encompass multiple pathways to licensure. So if you've completed the Dialosky exam, or you've done a PGY1 or completed one of the regional hands-based clinical assessments, these would all satisfy the requirement of a completion of a clinical assessment. And all of these are required by different states for licensure, and we didn't want to eliminate certain states because they only require one certain pathway. And so that's why the language was crafted broadly. And again, the point around, we want the compact to be able to evolve and grow with the profession. So if there's new exams out there in the future, the compact would not immediately become irrelevant and would be able to be flexible and evolve. And then last one here, completion of a criminal background check. And we talked about that on the previous slide. Okay, I want to talk about adverse action. That's another common question that we get related to the compact is how do states deal with discipline? And I did see a question in the chat about discipline and can states in the compact who haven't licensed somebody actually discipline a dentist? And the answer is yes, absolutely. And all of this is found in section 6 of the compact, which deals with adverse action. So it's certainly the case that the state retains sovereignty over the practice that occurs within their borders. So if somebody is practicing in your state, either on a license or a compact privilege, the dental board in your state has full authority and control over that person and can take an action just as if that person held a license. So even if they have a compact privilege, they don't have a license, the board can take any action that they are legally authorized to take against a licensee. They can take the same action against a compact privilege holder. So I'm going to go through a couple scenarios here just to kind of outline how this works. So in this scenario, the practitioner violates the Practice Act in their state of licensure, the state that issued the qualifying license. So the state of licensure leads the investigation. They take an action on that qualifying license. The action is then reported to all of the other remote states via the compact's data system. And then privileges are automatically suspended at that point. So if you remember, having an active unencumbered license is #1 requirement to use the compact. So because their license is no longer unencumbered, they can't use the compact anymore. So if there's an action, they're out of the compact until their license is restored back to good standing. Okay, in this scenario, the violation takes place in a remote state. So the remote state takes the lead on the investigation. The availability of significant investigative information is then reported to the commission's data system. So all the other member states would know, okay, this dentist is under investigation in a remote state. They have that information. And they're able to inquire more about maybe why that person's under investigation. But the specific investigative information itself is not shared until a final board action is taken for due process rights for that dentist. So the remote state conducts the investigation. They take the adverse action on the compact privilege. And once that action is taken, that action is applied across all the compact privileges that individual holds. So if that person, let's say they hold 3 compact privileges and one of the states suspends them for 6 months, all of their privileges are then suspended for 6 months across the board. And so the other element here is that the state of licensure can actually take the investigation that was done by the remote state and treat that activity as if it occurred within their borders. So just for an example of illustrating this, let's say I'm in Kentucky. Let's say I'm licensed in Kentucky and I'm practicing in Tennessee via a compact privilege. Tennessee takes an action on my compact privilege. They let everybody else know, hey, here's the action we took against Matt Schaefer. Now Kentucky can take the action taken by Tennessee. They have the investigatory file now. They can actually treat that activity that occurred in Tennessee as if it occurred within Kentucky. And they can take an action on my Kentucky dental license if the activity was particularly egregious and they felt like a reciprocal action was necessary. So hopefully that makes sense. I know that's complex process, but if there's any questions about that, please don't hesitate to ask, and we'd love to elaborate a little bit more. All right, so section 7 establishes the Compact Commission. This is another thing I want to explain a little bit more about. And so the Compact Commission, like I mentioned on the previous slide, is just it's the governing body that oversees and administers the compact. It's made up of the member states themselves. So if you look at Section 7, it clearly says that the commissioner for each state shall be a representative of the state licensing authority. So it's going to be a board. Usually it's staff. Usually it's legal counsel or an executive director or a board administrator are the ones who sit on these commissions. There is the possibility that board members could participate, although I would note here that board members in other compacts who serve as commissioners, it does make it difficult to establish a quorum when you've got a commission made up primarily of board members, just because we're talking about people with practices, with full-time jobs, and we're asking them to be a commissioner on this compact commission on top of all of their roles and responsibilities in their career. So the role kind of better fits with board staff, and so that's what we would encourage a state to look for in their nominee. But a state can nominate anybody as long as they're a representative of the state licensing authority. And the role of the commission, like I mentioned previously, is simply to administer and implement the compact. Anything outside of that is outside of the authority of the commission. So again, things like licensing requirements or scope of practice, all of those things are outside of the bounds of the commission. The commission could never write a rule that would impact a Dental Practice Act because the Dental Practice Act has nothing to do with the facilitation and administration of this compact. We leave the Practice Act to the states, and wherever you're practicing, that's whose Practice Act you have to abide by. So rules are limited to the implementation of the compact, and they're limited to licensees using the compact. There could never be a rule that extends outside of the population that's seeking to use the compact. So there could never be a rule that says, we're going to write a rule that impacts all Kentucky licensees. That would never happen. It would only be specific to those who are seeking to use the compact and get a compact privilege. So people hear about this concept of the Compact Commission. They think we're creating some sort of super board that's going to dictate practice and dictate policy to the states, and that's just simply not the case. Okay, so additional sections here. We just talked about the establishment of the commission, the data system. Like I mentioned previously, the commission is going to have a data system that houses information about licensees. So Section 8 talks about what that data system will look like and the types of information it will collect. I just talked about commission rulemaking because we want the compact to be flexible and be evergreen and evolve in the future in a flexible manner. We got to give the commission the rulemaking authority to account for those changes without the states having to readopt the legislation into statute. So, if the commission had no rulemaking authority, each state, every time there was a needed change in the compact, would have to repass the bill over and over again to account for all these changes. And so we just, that would be very cumbersome to have to do that. And so we want to give the commission rulemaking flexibility to better account for those changes. This is already happening in your states right now. The legislator legislates broadly, and then the administrative bodies in your states write rules to flesh out what the legislature has passed down to them. And so this would essentially work the same way. Oversight, dispute resolution, and enforcement. Because this is a legal contract between state, there's enforcement mechanisms for making sure that states are actually holding up their end of the bargain and complying with all the terms of the agreement. And there's a dispute resolution process in place in case there's a state who is non-compliant, is not doing what they've agreed to do by joining the compact. And this is a key differentiator between compacts and other types of endorsement or reciprocity, is that this is legally binding. So this isn't something that the board could just get in and out of in an easy manner through a rule or something like that. This is an act of your legislature, and by signing up for this, it's a legally binding contractual relationship that's enforceable. So that's a key principle of these licensure compacts, and why they work is because they have teeth. They have enforcement mechanisms. Section 11 is the effective date. So we say that the compact will come into effect when it's enacted by the 7th member state. So obviously, as you've seen, we're at 3 member states right now. So until we hit 7, we're kind of just in this limbo period where states are passing the compact, but none of this is into effect yet until we hit 7. There's also withdrawal and amendment provisions here. So if the member states chose to do so, they could collectively amend the compact. And there's also provisions for withdrawing. So it's not as if your state is stuck forever. If there was a clear reason to withdraw from the compact, there's a mechanism there for doing so. Construction and severability, just as with any other legal contract, it can be collectively severed by all the member states if they chose to do so. And then lastly, the binding effect of compact and other laws. This just states that if there's any conflict between existing state law and the compact, that the compact would supersede to the extent of the conflict. Now, people hear that and alarm bells start ringing when you start talking about laws being superseded. But remember, the commission can't do anything to impact scope of practice. The commission can't do anything to impact licensing requirements. So the existence of a true conflict between the compact and an existing state law is pretty rare, because in most instances, a lot of the licensure provisions are contained within, those requirements for a single state license or the Dental Practice Act, which the compact does not dictate anything on either of those two items. And so the existence of a conflict is rare. All right, so let's talk about benefits, and then we'll wrap up here in a few minutes. So obviously the primary benefit is the facilitation of multi-state practice. That's what we've been talking about. You no longer have to maintain multiple licenses simultaneously, but you can maintain one license and you have access to practice in multiple states. Enhances portability when licensees change state of residence. So highly mobile populations like military spouses that were mentioned earlier no longer have to navigate the state-by-state licensure process every time they move. They can just practice on a compact privilege. Expands employment opportunities into new markets. You're no longer bound to only work where you hold a license, but you could potentially work in new states that maybe you previously didn't have access to because of the licensing requirements in that state. I mentioned the point around military spouses, and then reduced financial burden. You're no longer having to pay renewal fees for individual licenses and complete continuing education for every license that you hold. So there is significant financial cost savings for the licensee. We do believe there's benefits for dental boards, reduction in administrative burden. So you're not having to process as many out-of-state applications anymore. So you're able to kind of free up your administrative staff to do other functions. Facilitates practitioner mobility during public health emergencies. We saw this during the COVID-19 pandemic. Ensures retention of jurisdiction over practitioners working in their state. This is the point I mentioned around adverse action. The state retains control over anybody practicing within their borders, whether that's through a compact privilege or through a license. The board can take an action on that person just as if they held a license. It actually expands their prosecutorial reach a little bit, because they can actually take action on practitioners whose conduct did not occur within their own state, which currently they don't have authorization to do that. Expands board cooperation on investigations and disputes. So boards are able to work better together around investigations at occur across state lines, and then enhancing public safety through shared data system. I mentioned this point previously. The commission's going to have a shared data system that houses all this information about licensees that we believe will provide a lot of value to boards. And then benefits to states. So this is a workforce development tool. We've heard a lot about workforce shortages, particularly in the dental hygiene population. We hear a lot about dentists who struggle to hire hygienists. And so this is a tool that states can explore. This is not a silver bullet or something that's going to solve all of the state shortages, but it is a lever that a state can pull to help alleviate some of these problems around particularly healthcare workforce shortages that we hear a lot about. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the differences. We get a lot of questions about, well, how does your compact differ from what AADB is doing right now? So if you aren't aware, the American Association of Dental Boards has crafted their own compact language that they're marketing to states now. And so I wanted to just clearly kind of delineate between the two. And, you know, this, from my perspective, I think our compact addresses all of the concerns that they raise, and a lot of the things, a lot of the problems that they have with the compact really could have been addressed through the development process and the public comment period and stakeholder review, but they raised all of these issues after the compact was finalized, and we didn't have a chance to address any of it. So, but just to clearly get into the specifics of the two. So the first key differentiator is around clinical examination. You can see there at the top. So the Dental and Dental Hygienist Compact allows for multiple clinical examination pathways. So I mentioned the Delaski, PGY1, and any of the regional based exams. The AADB Compact exclusively requires the ADEX exam. So if you did not take the ADEX exam, well, there is grandparenting if you took another regional hands-based psychomotor exam and you've been practicing for more than 5 years. So if you've been practicing less than 5 years, you have to take ADEX, and any new dentist in the future would have to take ADEX as well, which we do believe there are some anti-competitive concerns there when there are alternative exams out there and you're eliminating those alternatives and requiring that people take one exam when there are multiple exams out there. The second point here is the model. So the model is significantly different. I talked about the compact privilege model that the Dentist and Dental Hygienist Compact employs, which allows you to practice in a remote state without needing to obtain a license there. The AADB Compact is modeled after the Interstate Medical Licensure Compact, which is it's a model we call expedited licensure. So you end up we always give the analogy of like TSA pre-check. You end up where everybody else ends up. You just get there faster. So essentially, the Compact Commission is just a clearinghouse that gets you licensed in a state in a quick, streamlined manner. So you can check the box and say, I want to be licensed in Kentucky, Indiana, and Tennessee. The Compact Commission goes and actually does the work for you to get you licensed in those states. And because of the administrative burden that this puts on the commission, it's extremely expensive to administer. It costs the physician $700 every time they want to use the medical compact. And so if AADB is modeling their compact after this, it's going to be extremely cost prohibitive for a lot of dentists and dental hygienists if they chose to go down this path and states started to adopt their compact. Number three, restrictions on criminal history. So the Dentist and Dental Hygienist Compact has no disqualifiers around prior criminal history. We do require a background check, but the licensure decision is left up to the state. So if the state deems a person fit to practice, even if they have a criminal history, then they would be eligible for a compact privilege. But this is where I think states just have to trust each other that boards are licensing people that are fit to practice. The AADB compact, conversely, has a ban on anyone who has ever had their license disciplined other than a simple CE violation, or has been convicted of any crime regardless of the offense. So from our perspective, public policy is moving away from these types of punitive bans. You see a lot of states moving away from good moral character clauses, ban the box, things like that. So this does, from our perspective, seem overly restrictive to say if you've ever had an action on your license, or if you've ever had any conviction, regardless of the offense, you can't use the compact. And then lastly, the governance structure. And this, I think, is probably the most important point. So the Dentist and Dental Hygienist Compact is governed and administered by the member states. The Compact Commission is collectively owned by the member states. CSG has no role. The ADA has no role on the Compact Commission. The member states govern this agreement for themselves. The AADB Compact, conversely, is housed and owned by AADB itself. So it's called the AADB Compact. It's called the AADB Compact Commission. So this is not an instrumentality of the states. It's more of an instrumentality of AADB, which from our perspective, and anybody who has expertise in compact law and in compact drafting, this is going to raise a lot of alarm bells. All right, so some additional points of consideration here around this issue between the AADB Compact and the Dentist and Dental Hygienist Compact. So constitutionality, this gets back to the point that I just made. Because AADB is essentially naming themselves as the owner, administrator, operator of their compact, there is a concern from our attorneys around violation of non-delegation principles. So I'm not an attorney, so please do not take this as any kind of legal advice, but there is a principle out there in state constitutions that essentially say that a state cannot delegate its legislative authority to another entity, which from our compact legal experts, our drafting attorneys believe that the AADB compact is in violation of a lot of these principles. So it could conflict with state constitutions on these grounds. The model, we talked about the differences in the model. The medical compact is very expensive and cost prohibitive for a lot of physicians. Another important point to note here is that there's over 1 million physicians across the country. There's, I believe, 250,000 dentists and 250,000 dental hygienists. So if the compact costs a certain amount to administer, you're essentially doubling the cost on the licensee, because there's about 50% of dentists and dental hygienists as there are physicians. So it could be even more expensive than the medical compact to administer. I mentioned the anti-competitive concerns. There's clear advantages in the compact given to AADB, CDCA, RebCEDA, when there's alternative examinations out there that states are using for licensure purposes. Limiting mobility, I talked about how if you're a new dentist, or if you have been practicing under 5 years and you haven't passed the ADEX, then you're in a worse spot than without the compact. You'd have to go and retest and take the ADEX exam in order to use the compact. Another point here, naming AADB in the statutory language. So CSG, as best practice, really stays away from naming specific entities in the compact.
Well, she just ate, and she usually goes potty after she eats.
Sorry, I think we're having some background noise there. So we're talking about naming AADB in the statutory language. So CSG, as best practice, does not do this on a regular basis, because we would never want statutory language to be tethered to the existence of a private entity. So in this example, if AADB ever, for some reason, reorganizes themselves or changes their name or ceases to exist for some reason, the AADB compact goes away with AADB, because they're so closely tethered together, it would be impossible for the compact to exist without AADB existing. And so we see some problems there. We want the compact to last beyond any private entity. We don't want it to be reliant on the continued existence of a private entity. And so there are some problems there as well. And then lastly, and I made this point around the rigidity of the compact's eligibility requirements, specifically around license discipline history and criminal history as well. All right, so we are nearing the top of the hour. I want to have plenty of time for questions. I know we budgeted 90 minutes here, so I'll talk about next steps and then we'll get into some Q&A. So obviously the language is finalized. We're working with the ADA and ADHA to educate stakeholders doing things like this event tonight to give licensees, dental associations, boards, accurate information, and encourage everybody to check out our website, ddhcompact.org. There's a lot of good resources there for you, educational resources on the compact. And again, it'll be active when it's enacted by the 7th member state. Matt shared the slide earlier. Here's where we're at with current legislation. So Ohio, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey have pending bills that are still moving through the legislature, and Minnesota and Kansas had bills introduced that are rolled over to next year. Then you can see our 3 member states that have enacted so far. Coalition building. So this is an important concept that, we want, when we come into a state, we want to display a unified front. So obviously CSG, the ADA are going to be supportive. The ADSO is also very supportive. So if you're a dental association, maybe you don't have the bandwidth to take this on in terms of your legislative priorities. ADSO is operating in many states and taking the lead in terms of actually doing a lot of the advocacy and the lobbying. So if that's a consideration for you, I'd encourage you to contact the ADSO and see where they're at in your particular state. And then the hygienists, obviously, as well, are very supportive. Dental schools, ADEA has expressed their support. We have a letter of support from them. The Coalition for the Modernization of Dental Licensure. This is another group of advocacy-minded stakeholders that can be very influential in your state. And then lastly, the Defense State Liaison Office. So we mentioned that this is funded by the Department of Defense. DoD has regional liaisons that work out in the states that have good contacts in the legislature. So if you're interested in getting the compact enacted in your state, I'd encourage you to reach out to us and we can put you in contact with your DSLO regional liaison. All right, there's a preview of some of the resources on our website. We've got one-pagers on the compact. The map is kept up to date, and then we obviously have the model legislation there as well. And then here's contact information. So we have a general email inbox, and then you have Dan's email address as well as my email address as well. So with that, I'd love to take some questions, and I know there's a couple in the chat. And then if anybody wants to raise hand and unmute, you're welcome to ask your question that way as well.
Matt, there was a question about when you mentioned that a privilege is equivalent to a license. I answered it, but I think you ought to expand upon that.
Yeah, sure. So from a legal perspective, and there's legal precedent out there for this, a privilege is equivalent to a license. From a regulatory standpoint, from what a board can do to it, they can act upon it just as if that person held a license. And then also from like insurance reimbursement standpoint, they treat a compact privilege as equivalent to a license. We have guidance from CMS that has issued that guidance that compact privileges are equivalent to a license. So yeah, Dan, anything else you would add to that?
Nope, I think you covered it. And then I think you addressed the discipline issue, but somebody may want to expand on that further, and that's all I saw in the chat.
Okay. Well, yeah. So, I mean, on the point about discipline, just want to be very clear with everybody that your state retains its regulatory authority over anyone practicing within your state's borders. So it's certainly not the case that you can't take action on somebody that you haven't issued a license to. The compact is authorizing the state dental board to take an action on somebody who has a compact privilege. So maybe currently in state statute, There's provisions around, dental board in the disciplinary process and only disciplining those who have a license. But the compact clearly outlines provisions for how dental boards taking action against somebody who holds a privilege. So if they're in your state, whether it's via a license or a compact privilege, the board retains their control and authority over that practice and that practitioner. All right, we'll give it another second and see if there's any more questions. Anybody also able to unmute if you want to ask your question verbally? All right, well, I don't see any other questions, so we can wrap up and, oh, yeah, Dan, go ahead.
There's one in the chat.
Okay, so the question is, what role does funding from the government factor into this proposal? As we are all aware, funding priorities change over time. So I'm assuming we're talking about the funding from the Department of Defense. So the cooperative agreement that DoD has with CSG is for the creation of the Interstate Compact, but there's no obligation for DoD to support the compact in the long term. Their work supporting the compact in a official capacity is over after the development process. I'll say DSLO is still very motivated to have states pass as many of these compacts as possible. So there's no formal funding mechanism in place that's continuing to fund the efforts on this compact from the government side. But I don't see a future where DoD stops supporting these compacts legislatively. I think they really see them as the best solution for military spouses. And so they're going to support them until all states are a member of all the compacts. All right. Well, I can go ahead and wrap up. And again, just thank everybody for their time this evening. Hope this was informative. We will have a recording of this and have it up on our website. So feel free to share this with anybody in your networks who might be interested. Again, we just want you to have factual, accurate information about the compact and how it works. And we're happy to answer any questions that you have, follow-up questions. So you've got our email addresses that we provided in the presentation, and then also feel free to reach out to any of the ADA staff. Matt Rosetto can facilitate additional questions on that front. So yeah, thank you all for your time this evening, and hope everybody has a great rest of your night.